Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Game Plan with Dave Shore. Coach Mark Gottfried joining me from the Coach Mark Gottfried podcast, which I've caught several times. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing spectacular. Thank you for having me on.
Well, I say coach because many will remember you from your days coaching in NCAA basketball, but many will have watched either the podcast or heard you speak many times as well. What do you miss about the daily coaching world right now?
I had such a great run for probably 30, I think it's 33 or 34 years, and I loved it. I feel so blessed. And I think to answer your question, I think when you're not coaching, what you do miss, or what I miss, is those relationships with the players. And, you go back, and especially as you get older, you get to realize now that a lot of these guys are grown and they're in their 40s, and they're just wonderful young men. So the relationships that you build, the locker room, the camaraderie of a team, that I think is what you miss. But the daily grind sometimes in and out, not so much. But you do miss those, or I do miss those relationships with those guys on a daily basis.
My days with Coach Knight when I was calling his games at the end of his career. One time he told me his favorite time each and every year was the opening of camp, where he got to take the guys down the court and explain, especially to the new ones, the nuances of the motion offense. And knowing that he had done it year after year after year, it was fascinating to me as to what part of it was his favorite part. What was your favorite part of a season or time with your kids?
I love that time. I love those beginnings of every year, because the excitement, is, there's no wins or losses just yet, and you're excited. You're implementing all the things that you want to do, that for that particular year. But when I go back, I always kind of remember, some of my favorites. So those moments after a great win in the locker room. Those are some of the things that, they're hard to replicate in life. There's not very many ways where you're just, kind of hunkered into a locker room. You've just come off a big win. We had wins at Duke, at North Carolina, at Louisville, at Kentucky. When you go into those places and win, and you come into that locker room, and those guys are so excited, and you can see the benefits of the hard work. That to me is it's just, again, like I said, it's one of those things that's a little bit hard to replicate anywhere else in life.
Yeah, it really is. Sometimes it forces guys, maybe especially those who played the game, to really have a difficult time in transition afterwards because there's such a regiment, there's such a schedule. I've seen it many times with guys who I've had as employees being former players. Getting out of that life has been very hard. Is it hard for coaches? And I know for the guys coming out of the military, it can be hard as well because you're in such a routine and so disciplined.
I think right at the beginning it was hard for me. It was difficult because you wake up every day and you're a little bit like, "Oh, what do I do today? What am I going to do?" But I think then, after a while, for me, I settled into it, and I really have enjoyed my time outside of it. But I do think it is hard. I have had a lot of friends that were players that played for a long time, whether it was in the NBA or overseas. And, you got to think of those guys, that play into their 30s. You have to remember they've been basically playing since they've been 4, 5, or 6 or 7 years old. And so when that stops, we used to say when the ball stops bouncing, uh, you know, there is that transition where I've had some good friends of mine where, they can't find their footing for a while. It's difficult. It's very, very difficult. And I think in coaching a little bit, when you leave, there's a little bit of that as well. That, you're trying to regain your footing, and, how am I going to live my life on a daily basis? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. What am I going to do right now? But anyway, I do think that's a great valid point. I visited Iraq 3 times with our soldiers. I've been very fortunate with that. And like you mentioned, I think some of those guys, difficult time as they come out trying to find something that kind of fills their cup in the same way that it did when they were serving for their country. So great analogy there with sports, I think, in the military as well.
Coach, I think nothing has changed more in the landscape from your coaching days, but just overall for college sports. What has NIL meant now that you're looking at it and knowing what your former colleagues and guys who are doing this every day are having to go through? How has it changed the game?
Dave, it's such a great question, and it's changed it a lot. Obviously, the landscape. It's that we haven't had anything in the collegiate level that has shifted the landscape more than this one. You know, we've altered rules here and there and here and there through the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, but nothing has, you know, kind of rocked the world like this has. And you know, on one hand, the positive is I do believe there are young players that needed to be compensated or should have been compensated when the universities or the NCAA used their name, image, and likeness. You know, I had great players that they would walk into the bookstore on campus. It's their jersey, it's their number, it's their name on the back, and you know they're not getting a penny. And I think all of us understand that that part of it is simple. It's a simple thing that yes, those guys should be. They shouldn't. The universities and the large entities should not be allowed to use their name, image, and likeness. Now the flip side is that's not what we have anymore. This is not name, image, and likeness. There's a few cases where it's true, you know, NIL, where somebody has a massive following and, you know, they can advertise for a soap or a soda product or whatever it is, or a car dealership, and it's legit. But what has happened is it's become pay for play. And the NCAA, in my opinion, Dave, and I've said this publicly, and, you know, they're probably not real happy I say it, but they were asleep at the wheel. I mean, period. And this train was coming. It was coming down the tracks, and it was almost like there was an arrogance. There was a kind of a pompous attitude that, nah, it's not really ever going to get there. And when it did, you know, the dam broke loose. And now, you know, they're trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube in a way, and it's a mad scramble. And so, you know, when you have, you know, kids getting offered $5 or $6 or $7 million to come to a school to play, that's not NIL. That is professional sports on a college campus. And so I hope that we can somehow, or you know, the entities could, that those that are in power could get this solved. I don't think it's an easy one to solve, though. I think the state it is in, it's a tall order trying to get this thing figured out in a right way.
Watching it from your position, has it really blown your mind how quickly it came? I mean, some technology and innovation comes in small steps, right? This one went from us all arguing whether or not these young men or young women needed to be paid to where we are today, where we see some of them almost switching teams 2, 3 times, possibly 4.
So I think most people are in agreement on the outside, Dave, that the combination of NIL with the transfer portal at the same time, where kids don't have to sit out. You know, I was a transfer. I transferred from Oral Roberts to Alabama in
That's right.
1983. You know, sometimes that's okay, you know, but I sat out, which I actually thought benefited me. It made me a year older. I got more mature. I spent a year in the weight room. I academically got closer to a degree. And so the year of residence where I couldn't play, that wasn't a bad thing. Yeah, that was actually, I thought it was a good thing. But when you put NIL, or basically pay for play, I don't even like calling it NIL anymore. We're just paying guys to play. When you do that and then couple it at the exact same time with the transfer portal, it has really changed everything. And I think when I talk to the coaches that, you know, I'm close to all over the country who still coach, you know, the thing that most of us are missing, you know, is that relationship that you build with players over and it's not really a 2 or 3 or 4 year window. Usually it's a 6 or 7 year window because you've recruited guys for a couple years. Then you've coached them for 3 or 4 years. And, you know, sometimes kids would transfer and we all get that. We understand that. Sometimes, you know, kids make a decision, there's a coaching change or whatever it may be. But the combination of those two together has just made it to where it's a 1 year transactional team. There's very little loyalty and relationships being built anymore. And in college athletics, that was kind of the beauty of college athletics. That was the beauty for all of us. And so we've really lost that. And in my view, that's really a sad thing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's so sad. I'm getting pieces of advice for people out there who are watching this right now. We'll talk about business people here in just a minute. But what if you're a parent and you want your young athlete to be involved in college athletics? What advice are you giving them as a parent? In which way to point them and how to look at the coming days as their kid gets a little bit more talented and gets into those high school and collegiate programs?
You know, Dave, it's a wonderful question, and I'm glad you asked it. I was actually last night sitting in a young man's home who's a rising junior in high school. He's a really good player, and I'm friends with his parents, and I love this young guy, and he's a good player. And it's interesting because I think what I've told them is the number one thing right now is you have to understand that 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you would, as a high school player, you would be getting recruited at a much higher level, or you would have more attention surrounding you. But the model has changed in that most college coaches are going to dive into this portal. They're going to take a transfer first because they can, as if you're a coach and I can get a 23-year-old seasoned guy that's been playing for 3 or 4 years that's ready to walk into my program and he's developed his game. I'm going to look at that player before I would look at a high school player, unless the high school player is a top 20 kid in the country. He's at the top of the food chain. That's a little different. But for the majority of the kids, you have to have patience. The recruiting model has changed so dramatically that you may not get recruited until your senior year or after your senior year, because all of the rules, Dave, that have kind of been put in place in the last couple of years, none of them favor the high school player. None. They all favor the transfer, the college student, the guy who's ready to make a lot of money, who's established. And then the other part of it is, and I hate saying this out loud, but it's just the truth. You may have to go to a lower division school and then almost treat it like a junior college, which I hate all this.
Yeah.
But then play well enough and establish yourself to then you may get recruited to a Power 5 or to a higher level. And if you think about even advising a young person to do that, it kind of makes my skin crawl. But it's the name of the game. And you see it all the time. Kids will go to a Sun Belt Conference school or Ohio Valley Conference school or a Big West school. They'll play well for 1 year or 2 years, and their mind is already, I'm going in a portal. I'm hoping to get paid a lot more money. I'll play at a higher level. And so it is what it is for the current status situation that it is right now. But you got to have patience, and your road to where you get to, it may have a lot of zigs and zags in there before you actually get there, which is way different than it would have been years ago.
This is just such an evolving topic that who knows when people are watching this. But if I asked you, crystal ball, what, from your expertise, what happens in the next several years? Does there have to be reform to this coming somewhere down the pike?
Yeah, Dave, you asked so many great questions. I think here's what's going to happen. I think at some point, kids, they're going to enter into contracts with schools. And first of all, like I said earlier, we have to be honest and call it what it is. This is professional sports. This is not amateur sports any longer. And that's step number one. You have to be honest with what it is. Number two, kids have to have a contract. When I coach, Dave, I'm the head coach at NC State, and I've got a nice contract. And my first couple of years, we did really well.
You did? Yeah.
And I had a buyout in my contract of $3 million. If I left, either the school I was going to or me, somebody's paying NC State $3 million. And I think at some point, players have to have a contract. It's no different than if you're playing for the Lakers or the Cleveland Cavs or the Los Angeles Dodgers. You have a contract, and it might be a 2-year contract or 3-year contract. And if you agree to that, then part of that could be a buyout as well, that you then have to have a buyout if you choose to leave. And I think that's coming. I think that's going to be there at some point. I'm sure, you're going to have a ton of legal expertise weighing in on that. But in the current state it is, I don't think it's healthy for anybody, quite frankly. Yes, it's great. Kids are making money. Oh, that's wonderful. Blah, blah, blah. That's great. But it would be like if the Lakers, the Dodgers, the Bulls, it doesn't matter, if no player had a contract and everybody was a free agent every single year. Well, nobody would sign up. No commissioner would ever allow that in pro sports. And we've got to get to a place where that is the rules of college athletics, which is professional sports.
Yeah, that's a great point indeed. So let me flip the table. I've looked into the crystal ball, and let me get your reaction to something. Let's think about the University of Alabama or NC State, programs that you had been to. In the coming years, I think that those schools have to separate themselves from their own athletic departments and sell those to private equity firms, almost ownership taken on by an outside firm, just like they buy pro teams.
I 100% agree. And actually, I think that one's coming pretty quick. I
Yeah,
think
I
private
think so
equity is
too.
going to step in and see the value of basically, I wouldn't say owning, but somewhat owning an athletic department. Most, there's a handful of athletic departments that actually make a lot of money. There's a lot of them that don't, and they're subsidized by the university. But, at the Power Five conferences, I think there are that turning a profit, especially with media rights right now that each conference gets. And that's why, you see the Big Ten and the SEC and the expansion, and they just keep growing and growing. And now you've got UCLA and SC going into the Big Ten with Oregon and Washington a couple years ago. But I do believe that private equity is coming. I think private equity is coming pretty quickly. It's going to happen. And when it does, I think you'll see, like we always do, a chain reaction as it'll just keep rolling in. And again, I think at that point, then the student athlete can be held to a contract. And again, if you're a student athlete, if I'm at NC State, I say, I'll tell you what I'll do. We're going to pay you $1 million a year for 2 years or three. I'll give it to you for three. We'll do a 3-year contract. You're guaranteed $3 million unless there's a moral clause and, you're in trouble with the law or whatever it may be. Academically, you're not eligible. But on the flip side, then, you got $1 million buyout. And if you want to take the guaranteed $3 million, you can. But if you happen to choose to leave, somebody's paying. But I think private equity enables that to happen in a much quicker and cleaner way.
Yeah. All my coaching friends, I love the advice, the principles that you base yourself on. I think of Clint Hurdle, how many times I love talking to him and in baseball and some of the great advice he comes up with. When you give speeches, Mark, what are the most often asked questions from businesses out there, business leaders?
It depends. Everybody's a little bit different. And, I kind of, build my kind of baseline speech on what I call the get it done approach, and really when I do that, I've had close to 35 years. And if I go back even as a player, you're talking about, 40 to 45 years of playing, participate at a high level in college athletics. And, I draw from a lot of stories that were very motivating to me and inspirational to me. We break down the whole get it done approach into, 3 words of grit, integrity, and desire. And then, there's so many ways, that we just kind of take a deep dive into each one of those every opportunity that I have to speak. And so, my goal is to use the kind of leverage all of the experiences that I've had, throughout my life and really, hopefully kind of awaken and motivate everybody to become the best version of themselves. And there are a lot of people out there doing it, but I'm excited every time I get the opportunity to stand in front of a group. And it's kind of like standing in front of your team. I love the fact that I had the opportunity to hopefully inspire our players to want to become the best they can be. And now I'm able to do that in the corporate world and with different groups. And it's really been, it fills my cup, Dave. And I think more than anything, that's the most important thing.
Many people ask about management. If they're in charge, they're asking about how they should deal with some of their employees. Each of them are different. You did that with players. You didn't treat all of them the same way. How did you find the buttons to push and how you addressed that?
It's a wonderful question, Dave. I think for me, it came down to the relationships with the players. And, I think as a coach, and I think in any leader, I would guess in any organization, if you have relationships with people and there's trust and there's transparency and there's authenticity, I think that people are willing to respond. They're going to respond in a positive way. And there's trust built there. And I think in coaching, again, most times, I can go back to guys that I started recruiting when they were 14 or 15 years old. So by the time they got to me and I was able to coach them now, they arrived on campus, and not every player was that, but a lot of them were. There was already a relationship built. So I think with any leader in any organization, I think there has to be trust, number one. If they don't trust you, they're not buying. I don't care what you're selling, they're not buying. And then if they feel as though what you're trying to convey to them is coming from a place of, where there's truly some investment into how much I care about you, then I believe you got a chance. But without those, I think sometimes you're just whistling in the wind, and you're hoping and closing your eyes and praying for a miracle. And I just don't think that's going to work very often.
No, that is just tremendous stuff. I love picking your brain, Mark. Let me ask you a few things. You very rarely ever got to coach with other coaches that you appreciated. So if you had the chance, whether it be an Olympic team or whatever, to coach with someone else, another great coach out there, who would you want at your side?
That was a wonderful question. So I got to remember the year. I think it was 2006. I want to say I was an assistant coach for our USA Pan Am team that went to Rio de Janeiro, and James Jones, who's the head coach at Yale, was the other assistant, and Jay Wright, who won 2 national championships, Villanova, was our head coach. I tell you what I enjoyed about that, Dave. I enjoyed learning from somebody who did it differently than me. I think what happens a lot of times when we become a head coach or you're in a leadership position, you begin to believe that your way is the best way, especially when you've had some success. Then you see somebody else like Jay Wright, who I think is one of our generation's wonderful, most fabulous coaches. He proved it, and you know, but his style and the way we practiced or planned to practice, coached the game was way different than me. And I loved that. I loved coming home and saying, wow, it kind of opened your eyes a little bit. And so for me, I've always had great respect for Jay. Another guy, because when I look at that, I see people who I think their styles are much different than mine. I look at a guy like Tony Bennett, who coached and won a national championship in Virginia. When I look out there and say, if you ask me the 2 or 3 or 4 coaches I respect the most that I competed against over the years, Jim Boeheim was wonderful. What a great coach, but a wonderful, wonderful person. Patino, phenomenal. Roy Williams, Mike Krzyzewski. I mean, I can go down the line, but Tony Bennett, for me, if he was still coaching, I'd be knocking on his door to go watch his practices just because I would want to learn how he does what he does because he did it so well.
Now let me talk about your eye. It's easy when you're scouting to pick the A-level guys. The ones that you coaches were all trying to get a hold of. But when I used to do the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, I asked a lot of the guys sitting in the stands, what are some of the things you're looking for in those, I don't want to call them average players, but they're the ones who are trying to make it. And you're trying to fill your bench with some of those glue guys. What are you looking for? What attributes?
I think it's the same in any walk of life. I was always hunting for kids that I thought had some grit.
Yeah.
They had a mental toughness, and you can kind of see it at times. Their demeanor, their attitude, their enthusiasm, their energy, and guys that really understood what it took to win. I love to recruit players that came out of winning programs. In other words, if you're the best high school player on your team and your team can't win, that's a problem for me. On the flip side, I love those kids that could elevate their team. They lifted their team to another level. And I believe a lot of that comes from grit, just a toughness, a mental toughness that, and I think when you really study people, that's what stands out, because at the end of the day, we want to win, and talent doesn't always win. Talent helps you. There's no question. And you got to have good players, and people need to hire good people. But sometimes it's the other guys that kind of rise above the rest because, boy, they have an inner drive that their resiliency, the consistency, it's just there every day. And those are the guys and gals I think that sometimes are the ones that, lift your program. So I was hunting for that all of the time. And I think those types of people are the ones that help you win. And I used to have a saying, Dave, you have a hunch, you bet a bunch. And so when you got in your
Love it.
gut or you're saying, I think that guy's got it, I say go with it, because my eyes didn't lie to me very often.
No, just a few more minutes with Coach here. I call this kind of rapid fire because I am firing off the top of some interesting things that I think people find interesting. You were so engrossed in being a player and then a coach, and now you're speaking. Everybody has to have a hobby, though. What's your hobby? Do you have one?
Dave, I play, everybody will laugh at me now who's watching this, but I try to play 2 hours of pickleball every day. And
Hey,
I'm on the court at 8 o'clock. I'm ready to go. And you know, at my age, it gives me something super fun that I can compete with every day. So that's my vice right now is a little pickleball.
you know what? I heard, and you know our area here. I heard one of our former UNC greats down there, Tyler Hansbrough. He's like one of the top pickleball players, and he knows by heart every single guy in the world that I think is ranked in pickleball. So you're all becoming fanatics at it.
You know what's interesting, Dave? I had Tyler on my podcast, and we laughed about him being nicknamed Psycho. But can you imagine the Psycho at 6'9" on a pickleball court, smashing balls over that net? So there's no, and he's the guy just like he did in basketball. He's practicing 4 and 5 hours every day. So I would love to watch him play and just to see with his size. Oh my goodness! And you talk about grit and toughness. Now that guy was at the top of the food chain. So
Yeah.
that's fun.
All right. During the years when you were at Murray State, I was down the road at in Lexington covering Rick Pitino and the Wildcats at the time and still today. Basketball gets a lot of attention in Kentucky. You went to Alabama to coach. Football gets a lot of attention there. What's it like when you're coaching football or basketball at a football school that people, hold it so highly?
It was on one hand, it was wonderful because, the football atmosphere, especially in the SEC, there's really nothing like it in the country. And you know that those schools, Alabama, Auburn, and LSU, and Georgia, and all those down there in Florida. But I'll be very honest with you, Dave. I was at Alabama for 11 years, and we had been ranked number one in the country. We'd won an SEC championship. We had been to the Elite Eight. Nobody had ever done that at Alabama, and I couldn't get carpet for my locker room, and I was, I began to get frustrated, and it probably to my if I look back, I did not handle it well. I didn't handle it very well, and I got frustrated every day that our program deserves. And at that time at Alabama, you have to remember, we went through 5 head football coaches in 11 years. I mean, it was a revolving door of football, and I was there for Nick Saban's first about year and a half. But it's difficult at times. I think coaches that kind of embrace it, Bruce Pearl's done an amazing job at Auburn, kind of embracing it. Nate Oates has done a spectacular job at Alabama, and same thing. You kind of embrace it. It's not going away. You can't beat it. You're not going to beat it, and don't even try. It's just too big. But again, when I look back, I wish, looking back, I wish I could have handled it a little bit better because I think I let it start bothering me, and I probably made a massive mistake with that one.
Well, it's not a knock at all. I mean, because Florida goes through it all the time. They win national titles in college basketball, and people still get excited for Florida football to come around on the calendar first. But all right, so if I rode around the car with you, what am I listening to on the radio there? What's your choice of music, Mark?
Great question. I listen to I have a little playlist called the chill music. So I got 2 sons that are into this house and this EDM, and I can't get there. It's just a little bit too headbanging for me. But I listen to the old stuff, the old 70s, the Spinners and the Temptations, or I listen to a little soft, chill music. So I'm kind of diversified when it comes to music.
All right. I appreciate that indeed. Give me a plug. How can people find your podcast, and what else would you like them to find you on?
Well, I think the easiest way is to go to my website, which is just www.coachmarkgottfried.com, and it's all there. All of the podcast episodes are housed on my podcast. They're on Spotify and Apple and Google and all those things, YouTube. But they're also housed on my website. And then there's also opportunities for people to book me as a speaker, and you can get a pretty good idea, what you're getting if you have interest in having me as a speaker. So the website is the place to go.
Okay, and I'm going to put it in the comments, and we'll put it on this podcast as well. Coach, so good to catch up with you. I'll stay in touch, okay?
This was really fun, Dave. Thank you for having me.